The night began with a strange tension in the air, a kind of restless energy that always comes right before something changes, and Ethan felt it the moment he stepped out of his car and saw the porch light flickering at his mom's friend's house. Claire had called him only 10 minutes earlier, her voice soft and slurred, asking him if he could stop by for a moment because she felt bored and lonely and a little too drunk to stay alone. And even though Ethan had just gotten home from work, he turned the car around without a second thought because Claire had always been important to him, almost like a second parent, yet also someone whose presence stirred something deeper inside him, something he never dared to name. Inside the house the lights were dim and the living room smelled faintly of wine. Claire sat curled on the couch with her hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her cheeks warm with color, her eyes soft in that unfocused way that comes from drinking just a little too much. She smiled when she saw him, a slow sweet smile that held gratitude and something like relief, and she whispered his name in a way that made the room feel smaller and more intimate. Ethan felt his heart shift slightly in his chest, not in a romantic way exactly, but in the way a person feels when they are drawn toward someone who is vulnerable and dear to them. He walked closer, trying to hide his worry behind a casual expression, but Claire always saw through him, and even now her gaze slid over him like she was reading every quiet thought he tried to keep hidden. She laughed softly as he took the glass from her hand, telling him he always looked so serious and responsible, too mature for someone only 23. She said it with affection and something gentle in her tone, as if she admired that steadiness in him. Ethan helped her sit up straighter and asked if she had eaten anything. She shook her head with a loose, careless motion and said she had tried making dinner earlier but ended up burning everything and then gave up and opened wine instead. The laugh she gave afterward was soft and a little sad, the kind of laugh people use to hide loneliness. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, a quiet protective feeling, the kind that made him want to sit beside her and tell her she wasn't alone even if she felt that way. Claire had been going through a hard year. Her divorce had finalized 5 months ago and the house had felt too quiet since then, too big and too empty for one person. Ethan knew she pretended she was strong during the day, but nights were different. Nights were when memories returned and doubts whispered and silence settled like a weight on her shoulders. Tonight she looked like someone who needed a warm voice more than anything, someone who needed to feel seen. She leaned back against the couch and stared at him with a soft hazy expression, telling him she was grateful he came, that she didn't want to bother anyone else, and that his presence always calmed her. The words hit him with surprising force. Ethan sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance yet still close enough to offer warmth and reassurance. He told her he was here for anything she needed, and she nodded like that sentence meant more than he realized, her eyes glimmering in the dim light like she was fighting emotions she didn't want to face alone. The house grew quieter as they sat there, only the soft hum of the fridge and the distant wind outside breaking the stillness. Claire rested her head lightly against the back of the couch and spoke about her day in those uneven sentences drunk people often use. She told him the silence had been getting to her, how she had picked up a book but couldn't focus, how she had turned on the TV but everything felt empty, how she finally poured herself wine because she wanted to stop thinking for a while. Ethan listened carefully, his chest warm with empathy, because he knew loneliness too, even if he hid it better. Then something shifted. Claire's voice softened even more, and she told him she didn't just call him because she was drunk or bored, she called because she felt safe with him, because he was the only one she trusted enough to show her messy moments, her weak moments, her real moments. Ethan felt heat rise under his skin, not romantic heat but emotional heat, the kind that comes when someone you care about admits something deep and honest, something they never say out loud. He told her gently he was glad she trusted him, and she smiled again, smaller this time, as if that simple reply touched something tender inside her. She looked at him with eyes that shimmered with gratitude and vulnerability, telling him he had grown into someone so steady and kind, someone who made people feel less alone. Ethan didn't know what to say. He felt the weight of her words and the closeness of the moment, and suddenly the small living room felt warmer and more filled with emotion than he expected. Claire reached for the blanket beside her and pulled it over her legs. Then she shifted slightly closer to him, not in a romantic way, more like someone reaching for comfort in the simplest, safest form available. Outside the wind picked up and brushed against the windows, and Claire let out a long breath, telling him she didn't know why she felt so emotional tonight. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the loneliness, or maybe it was because someone she cared about deeply was finally sitting beside her. Ethan looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her voice. There was no flirtation in Her words, just raw truth, the kind that comes only when someone is tired of pretending they're strong all the time. She leaned her head lightly onto his shoulder, asking him if he could stay for a little while longer, just until she felt steady again, and Ethan nodded without hesitation, something inside him settling into place, because he realized he wasn't here out of obligation. He was here because he cared about her deeply, more than he had ever admitted even to himself. The room felt softer as she closed her eyes, breathing slowly, trusting him with her vulnerability. And just when Ethan thought the night would stay quiet, Claire whispered something so unexpected and fragile that it made his breath catch. She whispered that there was something she had wanted to tell him for months, something she had been too scared to say, something the divorce had made more complicated, something that might change how he saw her forever. She opened her eyes and looked at him with a mix of fear and hope, and Ethan felt his heart beat faster because he could sense the truth rising in her throat, a truth she had held back for too long. But she didn't finish her sentence. She paused, swallowed hard, and whispered that maybe she should wait until she wasn't drunk, maybe tomorrow would be better, maybe honesty was easier when wine softened the edges, but harder when consequences became real. Ethan leaned closer just slightly, his voice soft and steady as he asked her what she wanted to tell him. Claire looked at him, her eyes trembling with emotion, and she whispered one final sentence before the room fell silent around them. "I'm afraid that if I say it now I won't be able to take it back." And Ethan felt the entire night shift as if everything they knew was about to change. Ethan felt the air tighten around him after Claire whispered those trembling words. It was like the room itself leaned in waiting for what she would say next. He could see how her fingers pressed against the blanket as if she was holding something fragile inside her chest, something she had guarded for far too long. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to fear him or his reaction, but he stayed quiet because he sensed she needed space to breathe before she could speak again. The silence stretched warm and heavy between them, just long enough for him to feel every beat of his own heart. Claire rubbed her forehead slowly, then sat up a little straighter, though her movements were still gentle and unsteady from the wine. She looked around the dim living room like she was searching for courage in the shadows. Her voice came out soft and uneven as she told him that the divorce had left her feeling lost in ways she still didn't understand, that she had spent months pretending she was fine and strong and independent, but inside she had been aching for comfort, aching for warmth, aching for someone who made her feel seen again, someone who didn't look at her like she was broken. Ethan listened carefully, his mind racing but his expression calm. He wanted her to know she wasn't broken, that she wasn't alone, that she was so much stronger than she realized. But before he could speak, she reached out and touched his hand lightly. The touch was soft and warm, not romantic, but full of trust, full of the kind of connection people only share when they have crossed a line between friendship and something deeper, even if they didn't mean to. Her voice cracked when she admitted that the hardest part wasn't being alone. The hardest part was learning how to let herself need someone again. She said she had forgotten how to reach for another person without feeling guilty or scared. She tried to pull her hand back, but Ethan held it gently, reminding her she didn't have to hide anything from him. Her eyes softened at his quiet reassurance, and for a moment they just held each other's gaze without speaking because words felt too small for the emotions between them. Finally she whispered that the thing she had been scared to say was not dramatic or dangerous or shocking, it was simply the truth she had carried in silence. She said she had grown to rely on Ethan more than she expected, that his presence had become something steady in her unstable world. She told him that every time he visited his mom and stopped by her house for a moment, it made her day feel less empty, less heavy, less like she was drifting through her own life without direction. Her voice trembled as she said she didn't want to scare him away with her feelings, but she couldn't keep pretending they weren't there. Ethan felt warmth spread through him, not romantic desire, but something gentler, something like admiration mixed with empathy. He told her quietly that she wasn't a burden, she wasn't too much, she wasn't someone he felt obligated to care for. He told her he came because he wanted to, because he genuinely cared about how she felt, because he hated seeing her struggle in silence. Claire blinked as if she didn't believe him at first, but then her eyes softened and filled with gratitude so deep it made his chest tighten. She leaned back against the couch cushions, letting out a breath she had been holding for months. Ethan could see the exhaustion in her posture, the emotional weight she had been carrying alone. The wine didn't cause her vulnerability. It only loosened the lock on a door she had been keeping shut far too tightly. She confessed that there were days she felt invisible, days where the house echoed with memories she wished she could forget. Days where she wondered if life had already given her all the love she would ever get and now she had nothing ahead but loneliness. Ethan moved a little closer, not touching her but offering presence and warmth. He told her she deserved joy and peace and companionship, that life wasn't done with her, that she still had so much love inside her, the kind of love that made the world softer for everyone around her. Her eyes glimmered at his words and she whispered that he always knew exactly how to make her feel seen, exactly how to make her feel like she mattered. He felt a blush creep up his neck but he didn't look away. He wanted her to see honesty in his eyes too. Suddenly Claire laughed softly, a tired but real laugh, and said she felt ridiculous for confessing all this to someone so much younger. But Ethan shook his head firmly, telling her age had nothing to do with understanding someone's heart. She looked at him with surprise as if she hadn't expected such maturity. Then she whispered that sometimes he reminded her of the person she used to be. Before marriage, before heartbreak, before fear. Someone hopeful, someone brave, someone open to connections instead of running from them. The living room felt warmer as emotions filled the air. Claire reached for the glass of water on the table and Ethan quickly helped her hold it steady. Their hands brushed lightly, and Claire blinked slowly as if that tiny moment of contact surprised her more than anything. She whispered that she was scared she had leaned on him too much. Scared she had created a bond he didn't want. Scared she had complicated his life without meaning to. Ethan shook his head again, telling her she didn't complicate anything. She enriched it. She added meaning to it. She gave him someone to care for beyond himself. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something more but then she hesitated. Turning her head away with a soft trembling breath, she said she was afraid to tell him the last piece of her truth. Afraid he would misunderstand, afraid he would think her feelings were something inappropriate or reckless when they were neither. She explained that her heart wasn't reaching for romance or dependency. Her heart was reaching for connection, for genuine companionship, for a person who didn't judge her weak moments or walk away when she stumbled. Ethan nodded gently, telling her he understood, and she looked at him with tears in her eyes, not from sadness but from the relief of being understood without shame. She whispered that sometimes she cared about him so deeply it scared her, not in a romantic way, but in a way that felt like he had become a piece of her life she never expected to need. She said she didn't know when it happened, but somewhere between her divorce papers and her quiet nights she started relying on the sound of his voice, the calmness of his presence, the steadiness of his heart. Ethan felt something shift inside him, a warmth spreading into places he didn't know needed warmth. He hadn't realized how much he meant to her, how much his quiet presence had mattered in her darkest hours. He told her softly that he cared about her too, that she was someone he admired, someone he respected deeply, someone whose happiness mattered to him more than he ever admitted out loud. Claire's breath caught and she looked at him like she was hearing a language she had missed for years, a language of gentle affection spoken without motives or expectation. Then the room grew still again as she leaned her head against the back of the couch and let her eyes close for a moment. She whispered that she wished life had been kinder to her, that she wished she didn't have so much fear inside her, that she wished she could accept love and support without doubting she deserved it. Ethan touched her shoulder gently, telling her she deserved every kindness in the world. She deserved someone who reminded her she was strong even when she felt weak. She deserved peace after everything she had survived. Claire opened her eyes slowly, turning toward him with a mixture of hope and hesitation, and she whispered the words that would change the tone of the entire night, words that carried truth, longing, and quiet courage. She told him there was one more thing she needed to ask him, something she had been holding back not because she didn't trust him but because she didn't know what his answer would mean for her heart. She took a slow breath, her voice trembling as she said his name with a softness that made Ethan's chest tighten. Then she whispered a question so vulnerable it left the room silent. "Ethan, if I tell you what I need most tonight, will you stay, no matter what it is?" Her voice cracked at the end, and Ethan felt the weight of her words land on him, heavy and heartfelt. And he knew whatever she asked next would pull them deeper into honesty than they had ever gone before. Ethan felt his breath catch the moment Claire asked that question, the weight of her voice settling deep inside him like a stone dropped into still water, sending quiet ripples through his chest. He looked at her trembling hands and the fear hiding behind her eyes, and he understood this was not a question about romance or desire. It was a question about trust, about whether he would stay close to her heart when she finally revealed the truth she had kept locked away. He nodded slowly, telling her he was not going anywhere, not tonight, not as long as she needed him, and Claire let out a soft, unsteady breath as if those words gave her enough courage to keep going. She pulled the blanket tighter, around herself as if preparing for a confession that hurt to speak, her eyes drifting toward the window as the wind pushed gently against the glass. She whispered that she had spent months trying to rebuild her life after the divorce, months pretending she was fine while she hid every bruise on her heart. She told him she had grown used to being disappointed by people, used to being the one who stayed strong while everyone else leaned on her, used to giving more than she ever received. Her voice cracked when she said she wasn't even sure she remembered how to ask for help without feeling ashamed. Ethan moved closer, careful not to overwhelm her, and he told her she could ask him anything, anything at all, because she wasn't alone anymore. Her fingers brushed against his arm as she whispered that she didn't call him tonight just because she was bored or drunk. She called him because she had been fighting with her own heart all day, a silent battle between wanting to stay strong and wanting to crumble in front of someone she trusted. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed at how emotional she had become, but Ethan caught her hand gently, telling her she didn't need to apologize for feeling human. Claire stared at him for a long moment, her eyes warm and vulnerable. Then she whispered that what she needed tonight was simple, painfully simple, but it scared her because it meant showing him a part of herself she almost never revealed. She said she needed comfort, real comfort, not from distractions or shallow conversations, but from someone who cared about her deeply, someone who understood her, someone who made her feel grounded when her world tilted. Ethan felt his chest tighten with emotion. He nodded slowly, encouraging her to continue, letting her take her time, and she finally whispered the truth she had been hiding. She needed someone to stay with her, someone to sit close so she didn't feel the empty house pressing in on her heart, someone to remind her she wasn't forgotten or unwanted, someone to show her she still mattered. She admitted she had been scared he would think she was clingy or weak if she asked. She admitted she had almost hung up the phone earlier because she didn't want to burden him, but she called anyway because she trusted him more than anyone else, and because a quiet voice inside her had told her he would understand. Ethan felt a rush of emotion, not romantic interest but a deep protective warmth. He told her she wasn't asking too much, she wasn't a burden, she wasn't weak. He told her he was honored that she trusted him enough to ask for something so personal. Claire's eyes shimmered again and she whispered how relieved she was that he didn't pull away, how scared she had been that he would instinctively step back when she needed someone to step closer. He shook his head gently, telling her stepping closer was the easiest choice he had ever made. The room felt warmer as Claire shifted, slightly leaning into him, resting her head against his shoulder the same way she had earlier but now with intention instead of wine-loosened instinct. Ethan wrapped the blanket around her more securely and she let out a soft sigh as if the simple act of being cared for touched something tender inside her. She whispered that this was what she needed, not grand gestures, not dramatic confessions, not questions. She just needed the comfort of knowing someone was beside her, someone steady and patient, someone who didn't treat her emotions like an inconvenience. For a while they sat there in quiet stillness, the only sound the soft hum of the heater and the faint rhythm of Claire's breathing against him. Ethan let the moment settle gently around them, letting her find peace in the silence, and slowly he felt the tension leave her body as if the comfort she had asked for was finally reaching her heart. She whispered that she had forgotten how nice it felt to be supported, how nice it felt to lean on someone without fear that they would step away. Ethan told her she deserved support every day, not just nights when wine took down her walls. Claire pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes with a mix of gratitude and sadness. She told him she wasn't just lonely tonight. She had been lonely for years, even before the divorce. She said she had spent so long pretending to be strong that she had forgotten how to let someone hold her heart gently. She whispered that she didn't know how to rebuild herself alone, and she didn't want to keep pretending she could. Ethan felt emotion rise in him, and he told her she didn't have to rebuild alone, not anymore, not as long as he was here. Her lips trembled and she whispered his name with a softness that made the air feel heavy with meaning. She reached up and touched his cheek lightly, a simple grateful gesture, not romantic, not suggestive, just deeply human, a gesture of someone who finally felt seen after years of being invisible. Ethan leaned into her hand just enough to let her know he accepted the moment without misunderstanding it, and she closed her eyes briefly as if that small connection soothed something inside her. Then she whispered something that surprised him. She said she wasn't scared of being alone anymore. She was scared of being alone while wanting help. She said she was tired of people telling her she was strong when she didn't feel strong, tired of being praised for surviving instead of being helped to heal. Ethan understood what she meant in a way no one else had. He told her she Didn't have to be strong with him, not tonight, not ever, and Claire's breath escaped in a shaky exhale as if those words finally gave her permission to rest. She leaned back against him again, her hair brushing his shoulder, and whispered that life felt lighter when he was near, that she didn't know how to explain it but his presence made the world feel a little warmer, a little safer, a little more manageable. Ethan felt humbled by her words. He told her he cared about her more than she realized, not as someone broken but as someone brave, someone who kept going even when everything tried to pull her down. Claire's eyes softened with emotion at his words and she whispered a quiet thank you, one filled with sincerity and relief. As the night deepened, Claire's voice grew softer and more reflective. She spoke about her fears of starting over, her uncertainties about the future, her worries that she would never find her place again. Ethan listened to every word, offering gentle reassurance without making empty promises. He told her she wasn't starting from nothing. She was starting from experience, from growth, from strength she had earned through pain. She turned her head slightly and whispered she wished more people understood her the way he did. Wished more people cared to listen instead of judge. Ethan lifted the blanket higher around her shoulders and she smiled softly at the gesture. She told him he had a way of making people feel valued, a way of calming storms inside others even when he didn't realize it. He looked down shyly but she nudged his arm gently, telling him not to hide from the truth she saw in him. She said he was a good man, the kind of man who changed lives simply by showing up with kindness. Ethan felt a quiet warmth fill him, a warmth he didn't expect, because her words reached deeply into a part of him that rarely felt acknowledged. The room grew quieter as Claire's voice faded into small thoughtful whispers. She told him she didn't know what tomorrow would bring or how she would feel in the morning, but she knew one thing clearly: she didn't want this moment to end. She didn't want him to leave her sitting in the dark with her thoughts again. She wanted him to stay until her heart felt steady, until the fear inside her settled, until the loneliness disappeared completely, even if just for one night. Ethan nodded softly, telling her he would stay as long as she needed. She closed her eyes again, resting against him fully now, trusting him with her weight and her heart. She whispered that she didn't need anything else tonight, no confessions, no explanations, no questions. She just needed to know she wasn't facing the night alone. Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, gently giving her the comfort she had been seeking all along. The comfort of closeness, the comfort of connection, the comfort of human warmth after months of emotional coldness. And as the wind softened outside and the room grew warmer around them, Claire whispered one final sentence before sleep gently pulled her toward peace. "Thank you for staying, Ethan. I didn't know how much I needed this until you walked in." Ethan held her a little closer, letting her drift into rest, knowing that tonight had changed something between them forever. Not into romance, not into anything inappropriate, but into a deeper bond built on trust, vulnerability, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is reach for someone's hand in the dark and admit they need help. And he was there, steady and warm, ready to help her face tomorrow with a heart that felt just a little less broken than before.